Welcome to the Faithful Five podcast, our final edition of season one. At least I'm told that. So I am very excited to have a special guest today. You will notice that Father Frank Foley, a retired Navy military chaplain and current pastor at St. Gabriel's in Philadelphia, has joined us as our special guest today. So Father Frank, thank you for joining us, and give me a minute or two description of a little background on yourself.
Well, Tom, it's an honor to be with you. Thank you for inviting me. Okay, the thumbnail one is I'm born and bred in Philadelphia, North Philly. Went to Cardinal Doherty, went to St. Joe's for a year, entered the seminary at 19, ordained at 25, served 9 years in parishes up in the northeast section of Philly. And then I was assigned to be a chaplain in the United States Navy by then Cardinal Bevilacqua. And I served for 27 years all over the world on ships with Marines, Afghanistan. I retired on the first day of January 2021. And in June of that year, I was appointed the pastor of St. Gabriel's Parish in South Philadelphia. And it's great to be here.
Wow. That's the best opening answer I've ever heard. That's pretty good. Very concise. So obviously this episode of the Faithful Five is going to be a little different than the first 10 or so that we've had. We're going to start with asking Father Frank a little bit about his faith journey. At what point did faith play a role? And then he's going to get into, obviously, he spent 27 years in the military with both men and women, but to get his perspective on some of the ups and downs of men and their faith journey. So who better to talk to about this than Father Frank? So why don't we, Frank, tell us a little bit about your faith journey, where the calling to the priesthood, when things started with you.
Well, I can't ever remember a time when faith was not an important part of my life. And I would attribute that to my parents. As I look back, they were two extraordinary people. They didn't push their faith on anyone, but living their Catholic faith was as much a part of their life as breathing. So an example I can give to people is the idea that we would not go to Mass, that we wouldn't worship at Mass, was as foreign as if they had decided, well, we're not going to have our hearts beat today. No, it was just part of the warp and weave, the fabric of who they were. Very private. Our family prayed together at Mass, but as a family, prayer was very private. Like my father would say pray the rosary every day, but privately. My mother said her prayers, but privately. But I absorbed almost by osmosis. And then I had great priests at my parish, St. Athanasius, West Oak Lane. Boy, I kind of idolized them. And I started thinking about the priesthood probably even when I was in grade school. But in high school, I pushed that away. I wanted to be a lawyer. Honestly, I wanted to go into politics. And that was my goal when I went to St. Joe's. I had it all mapped out. At the end of my freshman year, there was also the International Eucharistic Congress. Between my graduation from high school and starting college, that had an impact. But at the end of my freshman year, I decided I want to be a lawyer, but that's not what God wants me to be. And I'm not going to argue with him.
So talk a little bit real quickly about, you wanted to be a lawyer or a politician, but God kept tugging and bringing you back to your calling, right?
I'd say that, yes. This may sound terribly naive or maybe self-inflated. I really thought each one of us is put here to change the world in some way. And I believe that politics is an honorable profession. Now, that might turn people off right away, but I'm in good stead with a number of Greek philosophers who felt the same. But I think it is a way to change the world. But I came to the conclusion that God wanted me to have an impact in the spiritual world. And I responded and have been following that path. since September of 1977 when I set foot in the seminary.
So you touched on your mom and dad. If you had to, and you can kind of do it in different categories if some other men have done that, who would be the most influential persons in your life, and where did that take you from a faith perspective?
Other than my parents?
Other than your parents.
Oh God. Well, again, not I can expand out my family on both sides. I had a great family. There was an uncle of mine, my uncle Walter Coleman, who after my father was the most inspiring man I ever met. Good, strong, faithful, knew suffering, um, but never complained. And that was my father's way too. He never complained. I would say now later in life, one of the people who inspired and I'd say changed my life was certainly Pope Benedict XVI, an extraordinary man, brilliant, holy, humble. When you an extraordinary writer, I would read things that he wrote that were profound but easy to grasp, almost poetic at times. St. John Henry Newman, the great English ecclesiastic of the 19th century, a convert, same way. Extraordinary man. Um, you know, I'm like every priest. I've been inspired by our Blessed Mother. Um, no, those are some, and I mentioned earlier my parish priests. I pastored when I was a boy, Monsignor Huey McMullen. Um, Friends of mine, brother priest, Father Joseph Okonski, extraordinary priest and a great pastor and a fantastic friend. Um, and some of the men and women I served with in the military. Um, General Greg Sturdivant. Um, I served under him in Afghanistan. And when we came back from there, I told him, I said, "Sir, you have inspired me to be a better man. I'm a better Christian. I'm a better leader. I'm a better officer. I'm a better man because of your example." Um, uh,
That's a great transition, Father Frank. So talk a little bit about, and it may or may not be a spiritual or faith component, but obviously being a better Christian is what you just said. What was it about him that really inspired, motivated, helped to transform you or keep the fuel going in your role?
well, he was an exceptional leader to make the grade, to be a general in any branch, but particularly in the Marine Corps because it's small, to be an admiral in the Navy, but you really have to have a quality of leadership. And he had it abundantly. And I remember the first time he stood in front of, there were probably about 150 of us who were senior officers, senior non-commissioned officers, and young Marines. We were all going over to Afghanistan. And I'm just going to paraphrase. He said, first of all, don't be afraid of innovation. Um, and linked to that is, I don't care whose idea it is, if it's a good one. If it is a private who comes up with a great idea, or it's a lieutenant colonel. If it's a great idea, we're going to do it. And that person gets credit for it. And the whole idea, we leave our egos behind. Our focus is on one another, taking care of one another and taking care of those junior Marines who are going out into a hostile environment, and cooperation. Don't ever, what would you say, become overly possessive of, oh, I want the credit and I'm in charge of this and I control this. All of that we leave behind. He not only said it, but he lived it. And I saw that man inspire from lance corporals to lieutenant colonels and above, uh, to leave ego behind, to work with one another, and just have that positive, if you want to call it energy, that brought the team together. And even though you were in a hostile environment, it was one of the most oddly enjoyable times of your life. It was dangerous at times, but it was it was wonderful to work in that environment. And he set the tone. I mean, this tone starts at the top, and if you want to, we've heard of trickle down economics. Well, there is a trickle down leadership, and the attitude of the man or woman at the top really does set the tone.
Yeah.
Jesus is the ultimate example of that. So
Ultimate. So you touched on some things there as we transition more to ego, pride, vanity, all being in control, not being able to surrender, all those things that I believe men in particular have challenges with. So talk a little bit about what you think are the biggest obstacles in all your time in the military and dealing with so many different types of men and at different levels. What is the biggest obstacle or obstacles to men trying to live their faith in today's world?
well, I think that one of them is, and we were speaking about this earlier, I think we live in a society where, unfortunately, we've absorbed things by osmosis. And we live to a great extent in a society and culture that I think has become graceless. And I gave you the examples, the omnipresence of corrosive bad language. I mean, the expression used to be, well, he curses like a sailor. Well, I was a sailor for 27 years, and now, and I think that was an unfair stereotype, but now you have men and women of every age, and they'll use that type of corrosive language in every environment, whether it's in front of their family, young children, to spouses, to one another. It's very shocking, and the acceptance, a kind of shrug of the shoulder thing. And I mentioned again before, the shoplifting, people who the littering that has befouled some sections of our city terribly, and violence. But the other thing is a perception that to be spiritual is to be weak. To be unspiritual is to be strong. And that is something that I think the devil has whispered into the ears of men more than either gender, that no, you want to be strong. If you want to be manly, then be abusive, be aggressive. But again, our Lord Jesus Christ is the ultimate example of true manliness and courage. But though he was in the form of God, he did not deem equality with God something to be grasped at. Rather, he humbled himself, taking on our human nature, even as St. Paul says, the form of a slave, dying on the cross. And yet no one is more glorious, triumphant, powerful. Humility is not weakness. Humility is honesty. The meek are not the weak. The meek are those who have true self-confidence and are comfortable in their skin. They don't have to prove anything to anybody. And that's what Christ calls us to. Hey, you're made by God. Be comfortable in your skin. You don't have to prove anything. And that's the reason he says, come on, follow me, and I'll show you how to be a real man.
So you touched on it earlier as well, kind of the God has made each of us in his image, and we all have individual missions. But you spoke earlier about maybe that God has been taken out of the equation in our lives. So
I do. I think to a great extent, again, we absorb from our culture, from our society, unconsciously. So a lot of things, particularly, I would say, we're in the American culture, over the last 55, 60 years, we have seen a dramatic decline in and practice of the faith, worshiping together. There were a lot of um, what Catholics call devotions that were popular that fell by the wayside. And some of them, that's understandable. They may have been for a certain time, but and some of them were pushed to the wayside, but they weren't replaced with anything else. So we did, I think that a lot of the healthy structures that encouraged us to be less narcissistic. Think of think of what is beyond you. Think of your ultimate destiny. Think of what, yes, here's one. We owe God, but we owe one another. And we need God's help to put that into practice. It's almost when if you stop working out, if you stop exercising, if you leave it all go, and then just eat the junk food of the current culture, is it any surprise that spiritually we're out of weight?
Talk a little bit about maybe how on the job, on a submarine in Afghanistan, can you share any, uh, obviously there's a lot of pressure like there is, whether a man's a Wall Street executive or he's, a sniper in the military. Talk a little bit, some practical ways that you tried to uh, keep the faith inside the men when you were with them, keep what I'm trying to say. Keep
Sure.
keep keep the spirituality as part of the overall mission.
Well, first of all, I was never on a submarine, so they don't have chaplains on submarine. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, cruisers, yes. Um, in some ways, it was an easier job uh, being on a ship or being with the Marines in Afghanistan, and I'll give you the simple reason why. When do people, if the, when do people normally see a Catholic priest? Let's talk about a Catholics. They may see him once a week if they go to church regularly, and only for an hour, give or take. Or they may see him at a wedding or a funeral. Um, but on a ship, they saw me all the time, walking through the passageway, eating with them, stopping them and stopping to talk to them. I dressed like them. I ate with them. Um, would do some of the same chores as they would. On an aircraft carrier, you do the flight deck walk, picking up every little bit of dirt or detritus that you could find, so it doesn't get sucked into the jets of the aircraft. When you were up there, you had every rank doing it together. So I had so much contact, more than I normally would in a regular parish. Same thing at the Naval Academy. And they were always seeing me, hearing me. So to use those encounters as an occasion of grace, first of all, to be positive, always positive, and to have a good sense of humor. I always thought that helped. And then finally, they knew I was a chaplain. They knew I was Father Foley. And to live that unapologetically, um, and, God bless. And if somebody asked me to say a prayer while I was walking down the hallway, take advantage of it. So I think just the presence reminded them, oh, yeah, there's the chaps, there's Father Foley. It just maybe for a moment, it made them think, oh, yeah, about God or say a prayer. And young men and women in that environment, they will ask you, hey, Father, could you just say a prayer for us right now? Say a prayer for our division, say a prayer for us. We're going out. The Marines were going out on patrol, or we're having an inspection here, Father, just say a prayer for us. Everybody gather around. And they're very open to that. And I was honored to be able to do that.
That's great. So two more quick questions, and you may have touched biggest myth for men trying to kind of live their faith, balance, balance, whatever their day is, children, business, family, whatever it would be. Some myths that you might dispel about living the faith.
I think one of them is, Father, I would do it, but I just don't have the time. That is, again, I think the devil whispers in our ears all the time to deceive, to distract, and that idea of, I just don't have the time. Well, we have the time to do what is important to us. And I have found I can use that same excuse. Oh, I'll say my prayers later or do this. I don't have the time to do it right now. The danger is if I use that excuse, I'm going to keep using it and never do what I need to do. But I have also found that when I take the time, and it's not a matter of volume, it is a matter of quality. To take that time, whether it is only 5 minutes of the day to pray, I guarantee you will find a lot more time to do other things that need to be done. And then I think the second thing is what is important, prioritize. And I think we're distracted by a lot of focusing on things that are not important. And then we become frustrated because even if we don't admit it, we know it's not important. The man or woman who doesn't really take the time for their spouse or their family, because I have other important things to do in business. Well, the most important business of a couple is one another. I used to have Marines and sailors, especially young ones who were getting married. Hey, Father, what's the best thing? What do you think the key is to being a good father, a good parent? I gave the same answer all the time. Love your spouse. You want to be a good parent, love your spouse. Because if you love your spouse, if you love one another, your children will pick that up and it will be a happy home. If you don't love one another, no matter how much monetary success you have, it's going to be problematic. So I think, like you said, love one another, be conscious of little things, of kindness, of support, of encouragement. Pray for one another out loud. Now that may sound corny or difficult, but it is hard to stay angry at someone if you are praying for them. Lord, thank you for my family. Bless my wife. Help me to be the man that she deserves along that way. And have a little schedule of I get up in the morning, say a short prayer, link it to the sign of the cross or the Our Father. And then in the middle of the day, just take a few, like 20 seconds, say another prayer. And the end of the day, the same thing. And then finally, don't miss the blessings. It's too easy to get distracted by, oh, this is going wrong. I'm frustrated. Every day focus on the blessing and look up and say, thank you. A wise priest said to me once, nothing pleases God more than a grateful heart. It changes our whole attitude.
150% agreement on that. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, thank you. It was an honor, as I said, Tom. God bless.
All right. Thanks, Father.